right, folks, we are back here on WLT's 1370 AM. I'm Scott Cannon. Over there is the Reverend Delwyn Campbell. We just finished talking about the widening racial wealth gap, and now since this is issues and answers,
right?
So, this is the answer. There was actually another task force that has been put together to deal with exactly this situation in the state of California. They have actually released a list of preliminary recommendations that could set the blueprint for Black Americans, or ADOS people, receiving reparations around the country, including free college tuition for every Black high school graduate and allowing prisoners to vote. Now, the 492-page report was released Wednesday by the state's task force to study and develop reparation proposals, which was set up by Governor Gavin Newsom in 2020 to look into possible reparations for descendants of early African migrants. The study said that the foundation of America's wealth was built upon trafficked African peoples and their descendants, built by their forced labor and their bodies as they were brought and sold as commodities. The American government at all levels allowed or participating in exploiting, abusing, terrorizing, and murdering people of African descent so that mostly white Americans could profit for their enslavement. It's chilling to hear it described. I mean, we know that's what happened.
Right.
We know that's what happened, but to hear it just sort of laid out there like that, it is still jarring, bro. It's still very jarring.
Yeah. And I know that that's an integral theme of, for example, the 1619 Project. Logically, the only problem I have with that assessment, though, is that it shortchanges, for example, the fact that America was a place where people who had an inventive mind could find opportunity to explore. I mean, the most significant inventions in the 18th through 20th centuries happened here in America.
Well, not the automobile. Automobile's German.
Yeah, but the mass production of the automobile was here.
But I'm still saying
without
the invention.
without the development of mass production, the automobile is just another niche thing.
People are gonna need cars.
No, they won't.
People are gonna have cars. My man Carl Benz and them.
No,
they were gonna make cars one way or the other.
Yeah, they were gonna make cars, but until you get mass production, the ordinary person was not gonna get them. Until Henry Ford designs the mass production process and pays his workers enough money to be able to buy what they produce. Automobiles are like yachts. Most people will get along just fine without one.
Nah, let me see what this caller has to say. Hello, caller.
Okay, good evening. How you all doing?
Hello,
hey,
what's going on?
Okay, I see you all talking about automobiles.
Yes.
Have you really did your research? Have you really Googling did your hardcore research? The first automobile came out was like the 1600s.
Okay.
Go do your hard research. Just don't start disagreeing. Go back in there and do your hard research. That thing, every hour that thing went like 1 mile an hour. It was running off steam. Just go look at it. I mean, Google it. It's going to pop up, son.
That's fine, but that's just like the first air vessel. Galileo designed it. But until you have a confluence of other factors, including mass production, it's an interesting idea. It's a niche product, but it's not something that you see as a tool of wealth.
They didn't use that. The thing was so slow. It wasn't used for anything. I just want you to go Google the first automobile. I'm not saying they used the thing to make wealth or to get wealth. Just go back and Google and look at how this thing looks.
Okay,
That's
but
all I was asking you to do.
I know, but from the point of what we were talking about, that's interesting but not relevant.
I don't care if it's relevant or not. I don't care if it's interesting or not. I was just saying the first automobile was in the
Okay,
well, I mean,
fine.
No, so let us tell us about the first automobile. What exactly?
Number piece of hardcore iron steel. That's all it is. Look like a train. Tron, just go back and Google it, man. Please go back and look at it. Just Google it.
Well, we're kind of doing a show right now, but thank you for your call.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you for your call. But, you know, look, the Industrial Revolution started I think, in Great Britain, okay? So it was going in that direction. You know, it was going in that direction. And definitely slavery definitely allowed the injection of capital into all those things to allow those things. Like, at the beginning of the Civil War, there's been books written about this. The total value of slaves in America was worth more than all the railroads and banks in this country put together. Okay? So slavery, I mean, a lot of people like to say, well, slavery was on its way out. Slavery was still extremely profitable. That's why if you look at Alexander Stephens, the Confederate vice president, they were saying, look, our way of life is dependent on these slaves. This is who we are.
That's true.
And so even things like the New York Stock Exchange.
But that wealth wasn't widely spread.
What do you mean widely spread? I mean, the New York Stock Exchange?
That wealth was concentrated.
Harvard University, Georgetown?
Hold on, let me answer.
I'm just saying.
That wealth was concentrated in the hands of very few people.
Well, that's how it is now, but that does not mean that America's wealth itself that allowed all the
and it was largely concentrated in the South.
Well, like the New York Stock Exchange isn't in the South.
No.
Harvard's not in the South. You know, like I said, these things were definitely benefited from slavery. Slaves were traded.
Harvard was established in the 1700s. So by the time of the Civil War, it's already been in existence for over 100 years.
Right.
All right. Now, its initial existence probably is predicated on slave labor, even though there weren't many slaves in that part of the country.
Right. There was some though. Like,
there were a few.
We underrate northern slavery.
Yeah, because it was not. In order for slavery to be really effective and useful, you would need a lot of workers.
Right.
And slave workers are the cheapest workers around.
Because you don't have to pay them.
Right. But if you don't need many workers, well, okay, you need only one or two workers. All right. Yeah, I guess not paying one or two workers it beats having to pay one or two workers, but it's still not a huge expense. Right. On the other hand, a slave laborer who's not trained, if you need somebody with a lot of skills, well, a slave really isn't going to do you much good because, well, you got to train him. And once you train him, unless you can keep him there, he's of immense value because there's very few of them. I mean, even Roman slavery, if you were a Roman slave who was a doctor, you were on a very different level than a Roman slave who worked on a farm.
Right.
Because of the skill sets. So I'm just saying in the North, slave labor was not as useful to them, but being part of the trade via transportation of slaves, the insurance of slaves, well, there's money to be made in those things too.
And economies are interconnected.
Yeah.
You know, so, they did need cotton.
Yeah.
They definitely needed cotton. They needed clothes.
Yeah. The British needed, it's funny to think about
it. And they needed trade too.
The South expected that Britain would support them because they needed cotton.
Right.
The British found other sources of cotton.
They got it from India, right? Didn't they end up getting it from India?
Which is funny because, the way they treated the Indians, the Asian Indians wasn't all that great either, but, they did draw the line that, the transatlantic slave trade. So I guess what I'm getting is, I think, it played a role. I think there were some other things that also played a role, one of which being that the United States was geographically isolated.
Yeah.
So the European powers couldn't really get in there and disrupt things like they could with one another in Europe.
They did try.
They did try. The fact that America, again, geographically isolated, people who came here in many cases came because in Europe they really didn't have much of an opportunity to do anything. If they weren't the firstborn, they wouldn't inherit. very much, if any, of their family's wealth. So coming to America would give them an opportunity. And so you had a lot of people with a desire to become somebody come to America, and there's room in America to accommodate that. Again, with regard to agriculture, you got a huge temperate zone that's good for growing things. Even, for the longest time, America's middle of the country was the world's breadbasket.
Right.
So there's a lot of things, but yeah, slavery, you can't diminish slavery. I'm just not sure that we can make slavery the end all and be all.
Well, see, here's the problem, and I was about to say that. The issue I have, because, look, 10 years after slavery ended, during Reconstruction, black people were well on our way to taking over the South.
Yeah.
Okay? There were 2,000 black politicians elected in the South. You had a black governor in Louisiana. You had black mayors, black governors, black sheriffs, black everything. The black codes that, Andrew Johnson, after Lincoln was assassinated, Andrew Johnson went back on all of Lincoln's promises. He was a out-and-out white supremacist.
Right.
He said, look, America is a country for white men, and America's government, as long as I'm the president, will be a government from right then. I think everybody should read this book I'm reading right now called From Here to Equality by Sandy Darity. Sandy Darity is a professor from University of North Carolina. He sort of started the sort of newer reparations movement. He's been at the very forefront of it. He works with ADOS and a lot of those people. So From Here to Equality, Sandy Darity, if anybody wants to talk about. But his book, he talks about Andrew Johnson and all the different ways that Andrew Johnson sort of kicked the legs from under black people in the South during the era of Reconstruction. And that's the thing the issue I've always had with calling it slave reparations is it implies that after 1865, America just said, okay, black people, we're sorry, let's live and let live. And that's really not the case. Like, you had another 100 years of terror, especially from the 1870s on, where black people, if we had just been left alone after slavery was over, we were on our way to doing a lot of big things. It ignores, I think, things like the Red Summer of 1919 and Oklahoma, Tulsa, which we just had the 101st anniversary of last week, the 101st anniversary of the Tulsa race massacre.
Right.
That's really what it was. They call it race riot. It was a race massacre. And all these other towns, Rosewood and other towns.
Yeah, Rosewood. That was one I was trying to think of.
Wilmington in 1898, Atlanta, 1906. There were massacres. Hell, the NAACP, that was another thing. The NAACP just had their anniversary a few days ago as well. The reason they got started was the Springfield race massacre, where the entire black community of Springfield was wiped out in Springfield, Illinois. So when you're talking about these things, and even into the modern day, things like the war on drugs, the prison industrial complex, our government helping Nicaraguan drug cartels flood our communities with cocaine, exacerbating the crack epidemic in the 80s, while at the same time mass incarcerating us, people like Joe Biden, who is our current president, Bill Clinton, Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush. All these people they knew that what the CIA had done and how these drugs ended up in our communities.
Right. And
still push for mass incarceration. When again, hopefully we'll get to it in this, be able to get to it this week, about Joe Biden's son is every bit the crackhead as anybody who's ever walked around Gary.
Whoa.
Every bit the crackhead, probably more. I mean, we're gonna talk about it. Hopefully we'll get to that point. But we see that Joe Biden ain't put his son in prison. We see that. Hunter is not going to go anywhere. But he made sure that cities like Gary and Chicago and Flint and Detroit and all these other places suffered major casualties to the war on drugs. Let me get this caller. Maybe they have something to say. Hello, caller.
Hello. You were mentioning some towns where race riots had occurred, or race annihilation.
Yes, yes.
The cover of Time magazine I just received today, and the entire front cover, I don't know if you can count, it looked like maybe 2,000 names of cities and places where there were racial riots.
Wow.
Wow,
That's
2,000 cities.
Yes. Take a look at it.
Well, it's the New Time magazine?
Yes. I just got it today.
Who's on the cover so I can...
The names of cities and places where they were.
Oh, okay. So that is the cover.
That's the cover.
Well, okay.
And well, no, I'm sorry. It's mass killings.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
right.
Take a look at it.
All right. Well, thank you for your call, sir.
Okay.